I was standing knee-deep in the floodwater holding a flashlight that barely cut through the rain when I heard a faint, broken hum. At first, I thought it was wind howling through the wreckage, but then I realized it was a song, a child's voice, 2 of them. That night, the air smelled of salt, diesel, and mud. We'd been in the Philippines for 6 weeks, leading a Navy relief mission after a typhoon had flattened half the coastal towns. I was the logistics officer in charge of food distribution, which meant my job was to keep trucks and helicopters moving. But nothing in the Navy had prepared me for what I saw that night outside the collapsed shop. 2 tiny girls sat huddled together wrapped in a sheet that was soaked straight through, their bare feet pressed into the mud. One of them clutched a half-broken stuffed bear, its button eye gone. When my flashlight hit their faces, they froze, eyes wide like animals used to being chased away. I lifted my hand slowly. "It's okay," I said, keeping my voice low. "You're safe." The older one, maybe by a few minutes, looked at me, lips trembling. "No, Mama," she whispered. "No, Papa." I crouched down, my knees hit the water. "Do you have a name?" She hesitated. "Arya," she said, pointing at herself. Then she touched her sister's shoulder. "Lena." Their voices shook like thin glass. Behind me, my chief called out, "Commander Reese choppers are ready to pull out. We've got to move before the tide hits again." I looked at him, then at the girls. Regulation said I was supposed to call local relief, but I'd seen the local orphanage 2 days earlier. It was overrun full of coughing, shivering kids. These 2 wouldn't make it through the night. I gave them each an MRE packet from my vest. They tore it open like they hadn't eaten in days. I wrapped my rain poncho around their shoulders and lifted them both into the truck. Chief looked uneasy. "Ma'am, that's against—" "I know," I said. "It's against policy, not against humanity." He didn't argue after that. When we reached base, I brought the girls into the storage tent. It was warm and dry at least. They sat on a crate of rice bags, watching me with cautious eyes. I called our interpreter, arranged a message to the local coordinator. No one responded. Too many crises, not enough hands. That night, while my team slept, I checked on them again. They had curled up under my navy jacket, tiny hands clutching the fabric like it was the world's last safe thing. For a moment, I just stood there, soaked boots and all staring at them. I'd seen combat zones, earthquakes, and famine before, but this 2 small souls with no one left hit me harder than any battlefield. I whispered, "You're safe now." The next morning, the storm finally broke. Sunlight spilled through the shredded tarp roof, turning the puddles gold. Arya and Lena were still asleep, the bear between them. I made a quiet promise they wouldn't go hungry again. Later that day, our regional commander called for updates. When he saw the girls, he frowned. "Commander Reese, we're not equipped for civilians," he said. "You'll need to turn them over to local authorities." "With respect, sir," I replied, "there are no authorities left standing. You want me to drop them in the mud and drive away?" He sighed. "You know that's not what I meant, just keep it temporary, until we can find placement." Temporary. That word stayed with me. For the next week, the girls followed me everywhere. I taught them to say thank you and water in English. They'd giggle when I got their words wrong in Tagalog. The base cooks started sneaking them cookies. Even the hard-nosed Marine medic built them a paper kite. But at night, they still woke screaming. Sometimes I'd find Arya clutching her sister, whispering, "Don't go." I'd sit beside them until they fell asleep again. Something about their fear felt too familiar. Maybe because I'd grown up that way, waiting for my own mother to come home from double shifts, pretending everything was fine. When my deployment ended, the girls cried as I packed. I told myself they'd be safe in the new shelter we'd arranged. But when I went to see that shelter, my heart sank. 30 kids packed into a tent, flies everywhere, no medicine. I stood there for a long time, watching Arya and Lena cling to each other. Then I made the call that changed everything. I contacted the embassy, filed emergency guardianship papers under humanitarian exemption. It took 3 days of arguing, 1 video call with a lawyer, and the help of a sympathetic chaplain. But when my flight left Manila that week, 2 tiny passengers sat beside me, bundled in donated sweaters, holding hands. They stared out the airplane window as the clouds rolled beneath us. Arya pointed and whispered, "Home." I smiled. "We'll figure out where that is." When we landed in Norfolk, Virginia, I expected relief. Instead, I got paperwork stares and questions that cut deeper than bullets. Are they yours? Are you sure this is allowed? Why bring them here? I didn't have all the answers. All I knew was that 2 children who had no one now had a chance, and maybe, just maybe, I had a reason to stop living only for the next mission. That night, as they slept in my spare bedroom, their new bedroom, I stood in the doorway and listened. The hum was back, that same soft tune from the storm. But now it sounded peaceful. And for the first time in years, so did my heart. When I first brought Aria and Lena to Virginia, I thought the hardest part was over. I'd faced typhoons, gunfire, and bureaucratic red tape, but nothing prepared me for the quiet battles waiting back home. I moved into a small rental house outside Norfolk, not far from the base. It had peeling white paint, an old swing in the front yard, and a garden patch that hadn't seen love in years. The girls didn't care. To them, it was a palace. They ran through every room that first night, touching the walls like they couldn't believe they were real. When I showed them their beds, fresh sheets, pink blankets, they stared, then burst into laughter, jumping up and down like little springs. I laughed too. It felt strange hearing laughter in a house that had been silent for so long. I didn't know the language of motherhood. I'd spent my adult life managing supplies orders and people twice my size, but never bedtime stories, bruised knees, or nightmares. Every morning I'd braid their hair unevenly and burn the pancakes. Every night I'd check twice that the doors were locked, as if fear itself might blow in with the wind. The first few weeks were blissful chaos. Then reality came knocking loud and cold. The paperwork from the State Department piled high. Immigration forms, sponsorship affidavits, medical clearances. It felt endless. The social worker assigned to our case was polite but cautious. "Commander Reese, it's unusual," she said. "2 foreign minors adopted by a single military officer. You understand how this looks?" I bit back my frustration. I understand exactly how it looks, and I understand what happens if I give them up. The woman sighed and nodded. "We'll process the paperwork as fast as we can." That meant months. In the meantime, I enrolled Aria and Lena in the local elementary school. The principal smiled tightly when he met us. "You've done a noble thing," he said, his eyes flicking toward the girls. "Let's hope they can adjust." At first, the adjustment seemed smooth. The twins were bright. Aria loved reading. Lena loved drawing, and both had voices like little bells. But children can be cruel, and accents make easy targets. One day, Aria came home quiet, clutching her backpack. I found a crumpled note inside. "Go back where you came from." My stomach twisted. When I asked what happened, she shrugged. "They say we talk funny." That night, I sat in the kitchen staring at the note. I'd served 20 countries, defended strangers, and buried friends. Yet somehow this one piece of paper hurt more than any wound I'd carried from the field. I visited the school the next morning. The teacher apologized, said they'd handle it internally. I smiled politely and walked out, my jaw tight. Handle it internally. That's what people said when they didn't want trouble. Trouble was something I understood. I spent weekends helping the girls with English. We'd sit around the dinner table reading children's books, laughing at the words that sounded silly. They taught me their lullabies songs they remembered from their parents. One night, as they sang softly in their old language, the words seemed to hang in the air, sad, hopeful, and haunting. Mom, Lena whispered when the song ended. She had started calling me that without asking. I hadn't corrected her. "When we sing, can people understand us?" I smiled. "Not always the word sweetheart, but they'll understand the feeling." The next few months blurred together. School runs, base check-ins, endless forms. My old colleagues stopped by sometimes. They'd ask about the girls, but I could feel the hesitation in their voices. To them, it was unusual, a Navy officer retiring early, raising 2 children from another country. One evening, a neighbor dropped off a pie. She smiled thinly. "It's nice what you're doing. God bless you. I just hope they don't have too much trauma." I closed the door and stood there, the pie in my hands, my throat tight. People meant well, but their pity always came wrapped in distance. Still, kindness appeared in unexpected places. A retired teacher down the street gave the twins books. The local pastor brought used clothes from the church. The old couple next door, both veterans, invited us to Sunday lunch. They treated the girls like grandchildren. Slowly, the house began to feel alive. There was laughter again and songs in 2 languages echoing through the hallways. But peace never stays untouched. In April, the school announced its annual Spring Showcase, a music event where each class would perform. The new music teacher, young and eager, asked if Aria and Lena could sing a special number. The twins were thrilled. I hesitated. The teacher said they're talented. It'll be great exposure. Something in her tone felt off, but I let it go. The night before the performance, the girls rehearsed in our living room. Their song was half in English, half in their mother tongue, a gentle hymn about home and gratitude. When they finished, I clapped. "You'll be wonderful," I said. They grinned. "We just want to make people smile." The morning of the event, I walked them to school. I noticed a few parents whispering near the gate, eyes following us. I'd learned to ignore that kind of look. It was the same one I'd seen at airports when I came home in uniform. Respect mixed with something colder. At work, I couldn't focus. Every time I glanced at the clock, I imagined them standing on that stage, nervous and small in front of hundreds of eyes. By the time I arrived at the school auditorium that evening, my palms were sweating. The stage lights glowed. Kids laughed, backstage parents filled the seats. I spotted the twins peeking out from behind the curtain, waving at me. I smiled and raised my thumb. They waved back, then turned to whisper something to each other, smiling shyly. I didn't know it then, but that night would change everything. Not just for them, but for everyone in that room. I don't think I've ever been as nervous as I was that night sitting in that gymnasium. I'd faced storm winds, firefights, and chopper crashes, but watching those 2 little girls step onto that bright wooden stage, that's what made my heart pound like a drum. The elementary school auditorium was packed. Parents leaned against the walls, teachers whispered, kids laughed and fidgeted in their rows of folding chairs. The smell of popcorn, perfume, and floor polish mixed in the air. Small-town America at its purest. When the lights dimmed, the principal gave a short speech about diversity and togetherness. He smiled too long when he mentioned our students who come from faraway places. People clapped politely. I felt my stomach twist. Then the showcase began. The younger kids sang patriotic songs, others performed little skits. Cameras flashed, grandparents clapped too early, and I tried to relax. But when the teacher announced, "And now we have a special performance from Aria and Lena Reese," my pulse spiked again. They walked out small and serious in their simple blue dresses. The microphone stood too tall, and Aria reached up on her toes to adjust it. A wave of quiet laughter rolled through the audience, tiny, sharp, and cruel. I saw the music teacher glance nervously at the principal. He shrugged. Aria turned to Lena, whispered something, and they nodded to each other. Then they began. Their voices were soft at first, thin as silk threads. Then they rose joined and filled the entire hall. The song was slow and unfamiliar, half English, half in their old language. Even if you didn't understand the words, you could feel the ache inside them, loss, hope, gratitude. By the second verse, no one was whispering. The sound of their harmony reached something deep in every heart there. I felt my throat close. When they finished, there was silence. Real silence. The kind that means no one dares to breathe. Then a single clap, another, and suddenly the whole place erupted, standing applause, people crying, kids staring wide-eyed. Aria and Lena bowed awkwardly, their little hands trembling. And in that moment, I swear I saw them change, the fear that had shadowed their faces since the storm gone. They stood taller, prouder. But for every tear in the crowd, there was one face that didn't move the principal. He kept his arms folded, lips pressed thin. Something about their song had unsettled him. After the show, parents surrounded me. "Are you their mom? That was beautiful. What language was that?" I smiled, thanked them, but I could see curiosity hiding behind their praise. When we got home that night, the twins were glowing. They hung their little participation ribbons on the fridge like medals. They listened, Mom, Lena said. No one laughed. I hugged them. "They'll remember you forever." But I didn't know how right I was. The next morning, the principal called. "Commander Reese, could you come by the school for a chat?" His office smelled like lemon cleaner and old coffee. He smiled too politely. The girls are talented, but some parents felt uncomfortable with their performance. I frowned. Uncomfortable how? Well, he said it was foreign. Some thought it wasn't appropriate for a school event focused on American values. I sat there staring at him. Sir, their song was about gratitude and home. There's nothing un-American about that. He cleared his throat. We're just trying to avoid controversy. Maybe next time they could sing something familiar. I stood up. I'll make sure they sing whatever speaks to their hearts. That's what music's for. He didn't answer, just watched me leave. That evening, Aria came home quieter than usual. Mom, she said Mr. Callow told us to sing the national anthem next time. Only the English part. I took a long breath. What did you tell him? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. I said, maybe later. I burst out laughing, tears in my eyes. The kind of laugh that hides pride behind exhaustion. Still whispers started again at school. The twins were those foreign girls who made everyone cry. Some kids avoided them. Others wanted to hear the song again like it was magic. Through it all, the girls stayed kind. They shared their snacks, helped classmates, and kept practicing music after dinner. The church choir invited them to sing on Sundays. Slowly, their voices became part of the town's rhythm. One evening, while I was folding laundry, I heard them in the next room singing softly the same song, but now with perfect English lines woven through. I peeked in. They were sitting on the floor writing lyrics in a notebook. What are you two up to? Aria looked up. We're writing a song for the graduation ceremony next month. For the whole school. She nodded. It's called Home is Where We're Heard. I didn't say anything for a moment. Just stood there watching their small hands scribble. Something inside me shifted. I'd spent months defending them, fighting off paperwork and prejudice. But I'd never realized they didn't need me to make people listen anymore. They were finding their own voices. The next few weeks were peaceful. Spring rolled in, bringing cherry blossoms and pollen that made us all sneeze. The girls practiced every day. Sometimes neighbors stopped to listen through the open window. Then, one afternoon, I got another call from the principal. His tone was stiff. About the graduation performance, we'll need to approve the song before they sing it. I asked why. He hesitated. There's concern that it might stir emotions again. We'd like to keep things simple this year. I hung up without answering. Simple wasn't what life had ever been for those girls. That night, I sat on the porch, watching them chase fireflies, their laughter echoing through the dusk. I realized something. Maybe revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about living so beautifully that those who doubted you had no choice but to bow their heads. Graduation season always made me emotional. Maybe it was the music, the flowers, the smell of freshly pressed clothes. Maybe it was because it reminded me of every farewell I'd ever stood through in uniform, each one promising a new beginning. For Aria and Lena, it was their first American graduation, 5th grade. Simple, innocent, but it meant the world to them. They'd picked their dresses weeks in advance, white with tiny blue ribbons. Lena wanted to wear a small star pin I'd given her from my Navy uniform. Aria practiced her speech every night in front of the mirror, thanking the teachers who helped us feel like we belong. I should have been proud and at peace, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A week before the ceremony, the principal called again. Commander Reese, the girls' song choice, has caused some debate. Debate, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed. Some parents feel that last time the emotional reaction was well disruptive. They'd prefer something lighter, maybe patriotic. We have to be careful not to make others uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with what I said, gratitude, love. Let's not get defensive, he replied. You have to understand people want familiar things. Their song was beautiful, but it was foreign. Foreign, that word again. When I hung up, my hand was shaking. Not from anger, but from disappointment. I'd worn the flag on my sleeve for 15 years. I'd saluted coffins draped in red, white, and blue. And now the same people whose freedom we'd protected were calling 2 little girls foreign for singing about home. That night, I didn't tell Aria and Lena about the call. They were too excited, too full of dreams. Instead, I watched them rehearse on the porch. They'd written a new bridge for their song, something soft and emotional. Home is not a color, not a place you see. Home is where a heart lets you be free. Their harmony was so pure it made the air tremble. 2 days later, the music teacher, Miss Halpern, dropped by unexpectedly. She stood awkwardly on the porch, clipboard in hand. "Commander, I'm so sorry. There's been a change." "What kind of change?" "The principal wants to move the twins' song to the end of the program. He thinks it's better that way." "Why, they've rehearsed for months." She hesitated. "Some parents complained, said their kids should have the spotlight, that maybe the twins got too much attention last time." I laughed quietly, the bitter kind of laugh that doesn't sound like laughter at all. "So we're punishing them for being too good." Miss Halpern's cheeks turned red. "I don't agree with it, ma'am, but I have to follow orders." Orders. I knew that word too well. After she left, I sat outside until the sun went down, my heart burning. I'd seen injustice in war zones and bureaucracies, but there was something crueler about the small injustices, the ones dressed as policy and tradition. The morning of the ceremony came bright and perfect, a clear June day. The gym was decorated with blue streamers, American flags, and a banner that read, "Moving Forward Together." I wondered if the people who made that sign understood the irony. I sat near the back in my best navy dress, the girls waving at me from the stage seats. They were radiant, so proud, so unaware of what was coming. The program began smoothly, speeches, certificates, laughter. I could feel the tension ease for a while. Maybe it would all go fine. Maybe I'd been too cautious. Then the final performance was announced. The principal stepped up, smiling in that way people do when they want to sound generous. "And now to close our ceremony, a special performance by our very own Aria and Lena Reese." His tone was polite, too polite. The whispering began even before the first note. A few chuckles from the back. I clenched my fists. The girls started singing. Their voices soared clear, gentle, perfect. But during the second verse I heard it, a low laugh, then another. A group of older boys near the aisle were snickering, mimicking the girls' accents under their breath. One parent turned to look but said nothing. The girls hesitated for half a beat. Aria glanced at Lena, and for a split second I saw fear flicker across her face. But Lena reached for her sister's hand and kept singing. Their voices didn't falter again. If anything, they grew stronger. By the final chorus, the mocking had stopped. The gym went still. Then something incredible happened. Without planning it, the audience began to stand, first one person, then two, then the whole crowd. The applause thundered. People were crying openly. The very boys who'd laughed looked at their shoes. And the principal, he didn't move. His face was pale, his hands gripping the podium. When the applause refused to die, he finally stood and bowed his head. After the ceremony, the girls ran to me, ribbons fluttering. "Mom, they liked it. Everyone liked it." I smiled, wiping tears before they noticed. "No, sweetheart," I whispered, "they didn't just like it, they heard you." But beneath the joy there was a quiet ache, because I knew that what had happened wasn't luck, it was grace. And sometimes grace arrives where it's least deserved. That night, after they went to bed, I stood by the window looking at the dark outline of the school across town. A few lights still glowed inside the gym. Maybe the principal was there thinking about what he'd witnessed. Maybe he wasn't. All I knew was this, that silence when their song ended. It wasn't just awe, it was conscience. I've seen a lot of silence in my life, the silence after an explosion. The silence when you realize a soldier you trained won't be coming home, but that night, the silence that filled that gymnasium was different. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from fear or loss. It came from realization, from shame, from beauty. When the twins finished singing, it felt as if even the air stood still. The last note floated above the heads of every person in that room, clear, weightless, and impossibly pure. And then, without warning, it fell away. For one heartbeat, no one clapped, no one breathed. I could see faces frozen mid-expression, teachers with hands half raised, parents with their phones lowered, children leaning forward like something sacred had just brushed past them. Then came the first sound. A sniffle, a gasp. Someone whispered, "My God." And then, like a wave-breaking applause, roared through the gym. Chairs scraped. People stood. The twins looked around, startled by the sound, before bowing awkwardly. The principal didn't clap. He just stared at them, unmoving, his face pale. But even he couldn't stop what was happening. One mother, one of the loudest critics, walked right up to the stage. She climbed 2 steps, eyes red, and hugged Arya and Lena. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, she said through tears. The girls didn't quite understand her words, but they smiled and nodded. Arya said softly, "Thank you." That's when I lost it. I stood and clapped until my palms stung. My chest hurt, but I couldn't stop smiling. The girls had come full circle from the rubble of a storm to a stage in a small American town. They had faced laughter, prejudice, pity, and they'd answered with something that transcended every wall built around them: music, honesty, grace. When the crowd finally began to settle, the principal approached the microphone. His voice cracked. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what you've just heard reminds us all of why we teach. Thank you, Arya and Lena Reese." The applause returned again, softer this time, respectful. Afterward, I found the girls backstage. They were sitting on the steps, holding their little ribbons, swinging their legs. Lena looked up at me. "Mom, why did everyone cry?" I sat beside them. Sometimes people cry when they hear truth. Arya frowned. "Did we do something wrong?" "No," I said, wrapping my arms around them. "You did everything right." They didn't know that the principal had been warned before the event by a few parents who didn't want foreign songs. They didn't know how close the school had come to canceling their performance altogether. They didn't need to know. But I knew. And I knew that what had happened tonight had changed something, not just for them, but for everyone who had watched. When we stepped outside, the sky was dark and full of stars. People were still gathered around the parking lot, talking in hushed tones. The same parents who had whispered about the twins being different were now shaking my hand, some too embarrassed to meet my eyes. One of the boys who had laughed during rehearsal stood near his father. He looked up as we passed. "Ma'am," he said, his voice small, "I'm sorry." I nodded, "Thank you." The drive home was quiet. The twins sat in the back seat holding hands. Every now and then, Lena hummed a few notes from the song, her eyes half closed. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickered to life automatically. I turned off the engine and sat for a while staring at that old swing in the yard. It moved slightly in the breeze like someone invisible was rocking it gently. "Mom," Arya said from the back seat, "did you ever sing before?" I smiled. "A long time ago, with my unit sometimes." "Did people listen?" "Sometimes," I said, "but not the way they listen to you two." She leaned forward between the seats. "Can we sing again tomorrow?" I turned to her. "You can sing every day for the rest of your lives." When they finally fell asleep that night, I stood by their door just like I had back on the base that first night in the Philippines. The same 2 small figures curled up under the same navy jacket I'd kept for them. Except now they weren't orphans. They were my daughters. The next morning there was a knock on the door. It was the principal. He wasn't wearing his usual crisp suit, just a wrinkled shirt and tired eyes. "Commander," he began quietly, "I owe you and your daughters an apology." I didn't say anything, just waited. He took a breath. "I thought I understood what education meant, but last night they taught me something I'd forgotten. That dignity doesn't need permission, it just needs to be heard." He paused, then added, "If you'd allow it, I'd like to invite them to sing again at next week's town memorial service." I looked past him toward the morning sun, the golden light spilling over the street. "They'll be there," I said. He nodded. "Thank you." And before leaving, he did something I'll never forget. He lowered his head slightly like a man acknowledging rank, not military but moral. After he left, I stood on the porch for a long time, listening to the neighborhood, waking up the distant hum of lawn mowers, birds in the trees, someone's radio playing old country music. In a quiet town that had once seen those girls as outsiders, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't shouted or fought, it's sung. The story spread faster than I expected. By Monday morning, people I didn't even know were stopping me at the grocery store. "You're the woman who brought those girls here, right?" they'd say, eyes soft, voices hushed. "That song, it reminded me of my own kids. You must be proud." I was. But I was also wary. I'd seen how quickly public sympathy can fade. One day you're an inspiration, the next a curiosity. Still, the news traveled. Someone had filmed the performance on their phone. Within a week, it was on local television under the headline "Refugee Twin Sisters Move Entire Town to Tears." The clip showed them on stage small and composed, their voices trembling but pure. At the end, when the camera panned to the audience, you could see the principal lowering his head. That image hit people harder than the song itself. The comments poured in: online faith in humanity restored. America still has heart. This is what we should stand for. A few cynics popped up too, of course. This is staged, one wrote. Probably propaganda. But the kindness drowned them out. For once, the internet wasn't tearing something apart, it was holding something together. The local paper came to our house for an interview. Aria wore the same blue dress she'd sung in, even though I told her she didn't have to. Lena sat beside her, clutching that old stuffed bear they'd carried since the typhoon. The reporter asked me, Commander Reese, when you brought these girls here, did you imagine something like this? I smiled. No, I just imagined they'd be safe. The article came out the following Sunday. It ran with a headline that made me cry quietly over my morning coffee. She brought them home. It wasn't about pity, it was about belonging. Then came the letters. Stacks of them, handwritten notes from veterans, teachers, even children. A retired Marine wrote, I once served under your command, ma'am. I'm proud to see you still leading from the front. One letter stood out. It was from an older man in North Carolina. He said his father had been rescued years ago during a Navy evacuation mission by a logistics officer named Reese. If that was you, he wrote, thank you. You saved my father's life. I remembered the name. It was 2013, a coastal flood operation. I hadn't thought about it in years. A few days later, that man showed up in Norfolk. He brought his father, now in a wheelchair, frail but alert. They wanted to meet the twins. When the girls came into the room, the old man smiled. So these are the angels who reminded us what America means. The twins giggled. Lena whispered to Aria, he called us angels. He turned to me, you gave them a future commander. Most people just give opinions. I didn't know what to say. My throat closed up. All I could manage was, thank you, sir. Word reached the base, too. The commanding officer invited me back for the Memorial Day ceremony. We'd be honored if your daughters sang the national anthem, he said. I paused. You sure the town's ready for that? He laughed softly. Ma'am, after what I've heard, the question is whether the anthem's ready for them. The morning of the ceremony, the twins stood in their little white dresses again, hair, neatly tied medals from school pinned over their hearts. As they sang, hundreds of uniforms stood at attention, men and women who'd fought across the world, now holding their hats to their chests, some with tears on their faces. When the song ended, I noticed one thing: the principal was there. He stood near the back cap. In hand, his posture, stiff eyes wet, and when our eyes met, he nodded once, slowly, deliberately, a salute without words. After the event, he approached us. Commander Reese, he said quietly, I want to do something right this time. The school boards approved a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in your daughters' names. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Aria looked up at him and said, thank you, sir. Lena added, we'll help other kids sing too. That did it. The man broke down, crying right there in front of everyone. Later that night when we got home, the twins curled up on the couch, watching the replay of the ceremony on TV. Mom, Aria said, was that revenge? The question caught me off guard. Revenge, I repeated. Yeah, Lena said. Like when people are mean, but then something good happens instead. I smiled. That's not revenge, sweetheart, that's grace. But you said once, Aria continued, that grace and strength can be the same thing. I looked at them. Two children who had once trembled under a bridge halfway across the world, now sitting safe, proud and whole. You're right, I said softly. They are. Outside, the night was calm. The streetlights glowed faintly on the wet pavement, the kind of soft peace you only notice when you've lived long enough to know how rare it is. I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped onto the porch. From inside, I heard them humming again, that same song that had silenced a whole town. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. And I thought about every mission I'd ever led, every rule I'd ever followed, every line I'd ever crossed for the sake of doing what was right. We fight wars to save nations, but sometimes the quietest victories happen at home, when a heart opens instead of hardens. And I realized that maybe that's what honor really is, not medals or ranks or salutes. It's the courage to choose love where anger would be easier. A full year passed after that performance, and our little town was never quite the same. It wasn't that everything changed overnight. People still hurried to work. Kids still teased each other, and the grocery store still ran out of milk every Friday. But there was a new gentleness in the air, the kind that comes after you've all shared a moment you can't quite explain, yet none of you will ever forget. For Arya and Lena, life became normal in the best possible way. They joined the school choir, made real friends, and filled our house with song every weekend. Sometimes they sang hymns, sometimes pop songs, sometimes melodies that belonged to no language at all. Their music carried something unteachable, something pure. By the following spring, they were invited to perform at the high school graduation. "They're local heroes now," the principal told me, smiling shyly as he handed me the letter. His hair had gone grayer since last year, but his eyes looked softer too. We'd be honored if they'd close the ceremony. The girls were thrilled. They spent weeks preparing. I caught them rehearsing in their room late at night, whispering harmonies so as not to wake me. The song they chose was called "Land of the Free," their own arrangement that blended America the Beautiful with the lullaby they'd sung back in the Philippines. The day of the performance, the gymnasium was packed again. Flags lined the walls, sunlight streamed through the high windows, and a soft hum of anticipation filled the air. As the twins walked onto the stage, I noticed something in the audience faces from all corners of the community. The same parents who once whispered about those foreign girls now held flowers. The same boys who'd once mocked their accents now stood with hands over hearts. Even the music teacher who had looked uneasy that first year was quietly wiping tears before the performance even began. And there, near the front row, sat the principal, his posture straight, his hands folded, eyes fixed on the stage. Then the twins began to sing. Their voices rose clear and radiant, blending seamlessly between English and the soft, lilting tones of their childhood language. The melody was familiar, yet different, like America itself, a harmony built from many homes, many hearts. When they reached the final line, "Let every heart be free," I saw something I'll never forget. The principal stood first. Then the entire gym followed, wave after wave, until the whole crowd was on its feet. Arya and Lena smiled shyly, bowing deeply before stepping down from the stage. After the ceremony, the principal approached me again, the same man who once questioned whether their song belonged here. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Commander Reese, I want you to know, you were right. They belonged here long before any of us realized it." I extended my hand, but he shook his head, and instead placed his palm over his heart. Then he said something that nearly undid me. "Welcome home, ma'am." Those words echoed long after the crowd had gone. That night, back at our house, the girls insisted on one last performance just for me. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the sky turning amber. They sang softly. No stage lights, no audience, just two voices, simple and true. When they finished, Lena leaned against my shoulder. "Mom," she asked quietly, "do you think people really change?" I thought about it for a long time. About the principal, about the neighbors who once looked away, about the quiet apologies that had come in the mail over the past months. "Yes," I said finally. "People change when they listen, when they stop judging long enough to hear someone else's song." Arya smiled. "Then we did the right thing." "You did," I whispered. "You showed them what honor sounds like." Later, after they went to bed, I sat alone for a while on the porch. The old swing creaked softly in the breeze. Fireflies blinked across the yard, and I thought about the years I'd spent overseas, the missions, the medals, the funerals. I'd thought honor lived in those moments, the sacrifice, the salute. But it wasn't until two little girls stood on a stage and turned cruelty into beauty that I finally understood what honor truly meant. It meant forgiveness. It meant courage without anger. It meant teaching through kindness, not revenge. As the crickets sang and the night deepened, I realized something else. Revenge doesn't always come with fire or fury. It can come softly wrapped in song, melting even the hardest hearts. And that's what Arya and Lena had done. Their voices had become my greatest mission's victory. Not one written in a report, but one written in lives changed. Before heading inside, I looked up at the stars, clear, countless, and bright. Somewhere up there, I hoped someone was watching and smiling. Maybe one of the comrades I'd lost along the way. Maybe their parents. Maybe both. I whispered a quiet promise into the night. They're home now. Then I turned off the porch light, my heart full, the silence around me peaceful once more. If you've listened this far, thank you. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of kindness you once gave or forgiveness you once received, share it. Tell someone that grace still matters, that compassion still wins. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is one small act of love, and a song brave enough to be sung. 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 To be sung.